People who hired a personal investigator, what did you uncover? Story 1. Okay, so I'll bite. Nothing like hunting down a psycho ex or anything like that, but interesting enough. So I was living in England and had an uncle living in assisted living in California. He was 95 at the time. A little fuzzy about some things, but on the whole, sharp as a tack. He was deeply religious and attended church weekly. A couple of women from the church had made friends with him, drove him to the church, brought him trinkets and whatnot, basically took care of him, sort of. Sounded okay to me. Hell, I was in England. What was I going to do? The only thing that jarred me a little bit was one time when I talked to the woman on the phone, one of them told me that my uncle had signed over power of attorney to them. That struck me as a little odd. My uncle and I weren't really close, but being his heir, along with my brother, wouldn't he have told me about it? I shrugged it off, though, again, what was I going to do? I was 6,000 miles away. Besides, and this is what gets a lot of people, he was of sound mind. He was a free agent, so it was really none of my freaking business. A year or two go by. I check on him periodically. Everything seems fine. I come home one night and my phone is ringing. It's the assisted care residence. Oh crap, what's happened? Is he dead? He's 97 freaking years old. I was expecting it any day. No, it's these two little old ladies. They're trying to get my uncle to sign over power of attorney to them. Wait a minute, hadn't he already done that? The alarm bells go off. Something is deeply wrong, and it was going to take me at least 24 hours to get back to California, given connections, flights, renting a car, blah, blah, blah. So I called a private investigator from England, tell him the situation, and as soon as I can get to the part about the woman, he stops me and says, "Wait, let me tell you how this story goes." He then proceeds to tell me that this is a common scam. These women cruise the churches looking for these little old guys who, on the surface, have no family to speak of and healthy retirement and investment accounts. So I get my butt back to California ASAP, and fortunately my uncle has signed nothing, although at this point they're harassing him hard. They had even kidnapped him and taken him to an attorney and tried to get him to sign over POA to them. Little did they know who they were dealing with. My dad's side of the family gets the gold standard for stubbornness. I learned this early on when my dad said, no, that was it, give it up, because that was an answer that was not going to change. My uncle, all 100 pounds and 97 years of him, had dug in his heels. So we sign over power of attorney to me, and now the hunt begins. Where was his accounts? These women handed over nothing to me. A few receipts, but no accounts, nothing. So this PI ended up hanging out for a few days, tracking everything down. I cannot begin to tell you how much I learned from this man, a complete original. Vietnam vet, former SEAL, carried a knife in his boot and a gun in his shoulder holster. So he shows me, it's mostly research, and that I resonate to, since I'm in research. Painstaking, boring, turning over one pebble at a time kind of investigation. Knowing how to talk to people, how to observe. It requires a massive amount of patience. We went to every bank within 20 miles, and by schmoozing and showing my power of attorney, we found what we thought was every account. I then went over everything. They had played a shell game, borrowed from him, hadn't quite stolen from him, but it took quite a while to figure out what they had done. Then I find the pièce de résistance. That's my best attempt at French there. They had him sign over all of his retirement accounts to them, or more specifically, to the younger one, being a spry 81 years old. So we do some further investigation. Turns out this one is broke. Looks like she sent it back to the Philippines or something. She spent a lot of time in Vegas. So here's how it shakes out, a common scam. These two little Jezebels made a play for my uncle, who fell for the younger one, hook, line, and sinker. They get him to sign over all of his retirement accounts to them, and then all they have to do is outlive him, at 81 and 83 respectively, and my uncle, 97, should be easy. So I confront them, told them that I knew what they were doing, and that I could turn them in. I had the evidence. I didn't really, I only strongly suspected, if they didn't tell me what else they had done. So they spilled the beans, told me what they had done. They swore they had only borrowed the money. We got it all signed back over. I didn't turn them in. I figured it would all come out in the wash anyway. I didn't want to see them go to jail, and I wasn't sure I could prove it anyway. But if it wasn't for this private investigator who had my back, they would have gotten away with it. I'm a firm believer I learned a poop ton from him. Now, for the editorial, this crime is rampant, intimidating, bamboozling, and ripping off the elderly. Most DAs won't touch it. If you ever get a whiff that an elderly relative is being abused or ripped off, if it even crosses your mind, step in immediately. Kick butt and take names. You may be the only defense they have. But I'll tell you, it turned out to be one of the most interesting experiences of my life. My uncle got the last laugh. He outlived both of them and passed away peaceably at 100 years old with me there with him. One of the last things he told me was that he had forgiven them for what they had done. Too long didn't read. Elderly uncle is nearly scammed out of $500,000 by a couple of Jezebels cruising the churches. PI steps in and saves the day. I learn a crap ton. Story 2. We discovered that the driver who hit me not only went off the side of the road where I was, legally, four-wheeling on a quad, and she was talking on the cell phone, looking into the passenger seat, driving with no insurance, and a revoked license because of previous convictions for causing accidents. After the truck, pushing my quad in a T-bone position, plowed so much dirt up in front of us that after 70 feet it finally came to a halt. The investigator had evidence that she was driving 35 miles per hour in a 25 zone, and she didn't brake after impact. After the truck came to a stop, she jumped out and started running away, but witnesses caught her and held her there. My friend, who was sitting behind me, both of us 14, were carted off in ambulances, and I never saw the woman's face. The trooper wrote the report that I, 14 years old, had taken an RV instead of ATV and pulled out in front of the woman, even though it was clear the accident happened off the roadway. The trooper interrogated me while I was laying on the ground, waiting for ambulances, before my parents even arrived. I was in shock while he rephrased the question, "Have you had any alcoholic or illegal substances today?" several times. My neighbors finally asked him to wait until my parents arrived. In the hospital room, he questioned me further while my parents were on their way. The nurse had to ask him to stop, as my neck was being evaluated, and I had not even had pain medication yet. The accident was deemed my fault, although there were 2 eyewitnesses who testified against the woman to the trooper and later in court, and I was told by the DMV I would have to pay the woman's truck damages before I was allowed to get a driver's license, and I carried SR22 insurance for 5 years after I received it. The investigator uncovered proof that the trooper knew the woman who hit me and was possibly family friends with her. For the months in between the accident and when the investigation was complete, I fought an awful amount of guilt, believing it was my fault, and not having any memory of the accident. My friend's leg was badly injured and required extensive surgeries over the next 5 years, and she was visiting from Texas and had to be med-evac'd back there via helicopter, which left her family with a huge financial burden. During that time, I even considered ending my life, and took one attempt that thankfully failed. My parents took the case to the state Supreme Court over the course of the next 3 years, and when we finally came to trial, the judge said the only way the report could be cleared and the financial obligations relieved is if the state trooper took back his statement. When we began going that route, we were told the trooper had been dismissed from the force for wrongful behavior, and his testimony was worth nothing. That was an expensive lesson in corruption. The financial stress contributed greatly to my parents' divorce. However, if we hadn't hired the investigator, we may have gone on thinking it was my fault. I'm very thankful to know that it truly wasn't. Story 3. My wife hired one. She found that she was wasting money, and that I'm a very boring person. We came from different cultures, but we knew we wanted to be with each other. She's Hispanic, born in another country, and I'm a hillbilly from Appalachia. There was a lot of jealousy early on both sides, because we simply couldn't relate. After a while, I grew tired of being suspicious and told her that if she wanted to be with someone else, to just tell me and I'll move on. But just tell me. It was very freeing for me. I guess to her, though, it only made her more suspicious. I got off work at 7 a.m. and there wasn't much to do, and not many places that were open for a couple more hours, so I would go to the gym. She worked an early first shift job, so we didn't see each other in the mornings, and I guess she didn't like not being able to account for the gap between me leaving work and me coming back to the apartment. The guy she hired to follow me around was terrible. I had my routine: get off work, go to the gym, go grab some breakfast, hit up Blockbuster, maybe go to a pet store. We had birds and fish. At the time in the morning, these places are empty. Like I said, I'm a boring person. Cut to a few days later, I leave the gym and the new guy behind. Head to a restaurant, and in comes the new guy from the gym. Creepy. I eat, then leave, go to Blockbuster, and in he comes. So here I am, suspicious. The next day at the gym, I'm telling my buddy about how creepy it was for the new guy to show up everywhere I go, and he agrees. I'm done working out and tell my buddy that I'm going to leave, and that I'm going to a specific pet store. And if the guy leaves the gym right after me, that my buddy should head to the same pet store. And that was what happened. I go to the store. A couple minutes later, in walks the guy. And a minute after that, in comes my buddy. We ended up pinning the guy to the floor. I asked why, and he starts saying that it's just a job, and that he ain't seen nothing. We released him back into the wilds, with the order that he's not to show up at the gym again. I get home, call her up, and say that she hired the biggest idiot around, and that she needs to stop wasting money. She asks what happened. I tell her to ask him, since she gave him some money. Her jealousy died down after that. Well, that, and I made the ultimate quote to her that made sense. I said, "If I was getting laid as much as you think I am, wouldn't I be a lot happier?" And that was that. For those folks hoping for a different ending, sorry to disappoint. We've been together for almost a quarter of a century, and everything is fine. Maybe she just couldn't believe that she was involved with someone so boring. Story 4. Private investigator here. I work in 3 countries, including the US. The messiest case I ever had was a cross-border child snatch involving a family dispute in Texas, where the mother took the children to Mexico. The father was livid when he called me because no authorities in either country would get involved. He also couldn't go into Mexico and snatch the children back because if the Mexicans caught him, he would have ended up in a Mexican prison, while it was all sorted out, and his wife was related to a Mexican alderman who might have used his influence to really slam him. He told me he was convinced she'd gone off to live with an old flame in a major Mexican city about 3 hours from the Texas border. I remember how hard he cried, and even considered doing the job pro bono. He wanted to hire me for 2 jobs. First, to prove infidelity on her part, and then, once we had that down, use the evidence as leverage against her if she resisted his taking the children back. I spent a week researching the woman and the man. They were both decent, hard-working people at a glance. Nice homes, steady jobs, well-raised children. Then I started digging into the domestic violence calls at the house. He'd beaten her on 4 different occasions over a 3-year period. The last one resulted in a stay at the hospital with a broken tibia after he curb-stomped her on the fireplace. I started getting a sour feeling about the case. I traveled down to see where the woman lived, found her on my second day. The 2 children, both young girls, were happy and bouncing about. The woman walked with a limp. It was the same leg he'd broken. I followed that family for 3 days, thinking and wondering what I was going to do. On day 4, I made up my mind. I went to an attorney who worked in the city she lived in, colleague of a friend. I paid him $1,400 to deliver a message to her, saying she needed to make reparations to her family affairs and file for a divorce and custody because he was coming after her. I went back to the husband and told him I was withdrawing from his case because I didn't like where it was heading. He was angry and instantly grew aggressive. That just solidified my intentions. I told him that if he wanted to press me, I could just as easily go work for her, and I would have taken her case pro bono. This was a few years ago now. I hear she's doing well and continues living in Mexico, but is legally divorced with full custody of her children. She still walks with a limp. They always say it's best not to get involved, and I mostly agree, but sometimes the world needs you to. Story 5. I finally had to make a throwaway for this one. When I was 10, my parents separated and went through a nasty divorce. Sometime during all of that, he hired a private investigator to follow my mom around. The PI concluded that my mother was a prostitute. She did escort service and hung around doctors' conventions. The PI took photos and logged everything. My dad snuck into the house my mother and I lived in with a camcorder and recorded the discovery of a ledger documenting all of her clients and the money exchange. He leveraged it in the divorce, so he didn't get bent over entirely. My dad didn't tell me any of this until I was 17 or so. I didn't believe it until I thought back and remembered some things. She had a pager, and back in the 90s, only a few types of people had pagers: doctors and hookers. She would suddenly be gone late at night if I woke up. She would always say she was out grocery shopping. I also remember walking in on her wearing a revealing dress made of leather. No more revealing than what girls wear to the club, but hey, that stuff is weird when it's your mom and you're 10. Anywho, my dad still throws it at me when he wants to prove how much better of a person he is than my mother or my stepdad, who married a hooker. In her defense, she was paying her way to become an RN, which she is now. Too long didn't read. PI followed my mom for my dad during a nasty divorce, found out she was a hooker. Dad holds grudge to this day and told his kids about it. Since there are some folks that want to know, she got custody. My stepdad is all sorts of awesome. Turns out she was pretty crazy, divorced my stepdad, and walked out of what was left of her family. My stepdad stuck with us and has supported us ever since. I was 18 when she took off, and they had been divorced for years. I'm 29 now, and he's my best friend and my best parent. Haven't heard from her since. Story 6. Not me, but my mom was an attorney who worked in workers' compensation insurance. Her colleagues were representing a woman who had been gravely injured on the job and deemed totally unable to work. The opposing attorney hired a PI to investigate this woman. Let's call her Jane. They get to court and present the video footage as their platinum evidence, proving that this woman was totally able to work. Here, Jane is mowing her lawn. Here, she's unloading her groceries from her car. Here, she's walking the dog. Here, she's going for a run, etc., etc. Jane's attorney sat there totally quiet. When it was their turn to cross-examine the PI, they declined any questions. Their turn was up next. Who is the first witness for the opposing side? We would like to call Jane's identical twin sister to the stand. Jane's identical twin had moved in with her bedridden sister after the work accident. Full benefits awarded to Jane. Apparently the look on the faces of the opposing attorneys was the stuff lawyers' dreams are made of. Story 7. About 10 years ago, my cousin was deployed in Afghanistan on his second tour. During phone calls back home, his daughter made mention of an uncle he knew didn't exist. My aunt decided to hire a PI for him and found out his wife was cheating with a doctor. Of course, he was heartbroken. The divorce that followed was quick. However, there's a bright side to this. After switching to a reserve unit, he was able to finish college and go to law school. His ex-wife? She was dumped by the doctor not long after the divorce. She attempted to reconcile, but my cousin refused. He's remarried. She lives with a group of friends in some rundown house. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.